This is Rodrigo Arancibia from the High Tech High Graduate School of Education, and I'm here to talk to you about EdSpace, a social learning network. Well, what is EdSpace? EdSpace is a place for you to connect and get curious with the people that you want to connect with. But what EdSpace isn't is a popularity contest like Twitter. It's not a place for you to sit and listen and sit and get like YouTube. EdSpace TV is a personal channel for you to do your own vlogging to tell your story about your experiences. Not comfortable with video yet? It's all good. Every single channel is going to have post-it boards. Write your question down on the post-it board and someone will respond to you with a video post. Social media networks are noisy. That's why we created EdSpace filters. On every single channel, you'll be able to drill down on which educators you want to learn from and which educators you want to get curious with. Whether you're a second grade teacher in Arkansas or a project-based learning teacher in San Diego, use the EdSpace filters to find your people and get curious with them. EdSpace has two types of channels. Public channels that everybody can view and everybody can access, and private channels that only teachers from your school can see. Cool thing is, you can also see which teachers from your school site are signed up for EdSpace. So what's next? Introduce yourself. Pin a video to your personal channel and tell us what you're curious about. Tell us what you're working on. Tell us what you're passionate about. The most important thing is that you get started. Show up and share more.
Welcome to this first session on Day 1, Future of Schools of the Inspired Are You Future Ready online conference. We have with us for this partner keynote Mr. Ben Sowter. Ben is Senior Vice President at QS Quacquarelli Simmons, best known for the QS World University Rankings. He brings with him a wealth of experience, having traveled the world, visiting many universities, including most of the top 50 universities in the QS list. He'll be sharing today on the topic of choose your own adventure, why university remains the best path to a purposeful destiny in an uncertain future, going through topics as to why university remains relevant in today's post-pandemic reality. Join us for this session with Ben from QS, our esteemed partners for the Inspired Conference.
In 1979, a little-known author by the name of Edward Packard published a genre-defining book titled The Cave of Time. He'd been working on the concept for over 10 years and finally got interest from a publisher to produce the first in what became known as the game book genre. For the first time in this book, children and teenagers could decide their own fate. They could make their own decisions. Sometimes a dice was involved to decide the outcome of a given encounter or battle, but for the most part, there were choices to be made throughout the book that took you down different branches and paths in the story to arrive at a different ultimate destination. In many ways, it was the precursor and a competitor to computer gaming at the time, which looked very different in nature than it does today. Ladies and gentlemen, this is what computer gaming looked like in 1979. Perhaps in this context, the vivid, high-definition imagined worlds that you could enter with the game book were somehow of their time. And whilst gaming was still finding its feet and exploring the potential of the technology, our imaginations were this spectacular world into which we could escape. And the idea of being able to decide our own path through these vivid stories was captivating throughout the 80s and into the early 90s. The series was immensely successful. It went on to spawn over 300 titles and, much like Lego does today, franchised itself out with Star Wars editions and so forth, and sold millions of copies through the 80s and into the early 90s. My name is Ben Sowter. I'm Senior Vice President at QS, and I lead the QS Intelligence Unit. I'm also one of the originators of the QS World University Rankings, which has gone on to become the most popular ranking of its kind and an important trusted source for millions of students worldwide who are considering their future. At QS, we are on a mission to empower 1 billion future learners through making those insight and data-informed decisions that give them the best probability of finding themselves on the right path. And the title of my talk today is Choose Your Own Adventure, or Why University Remains the Best Path to a Purposeful Destiny in an Uncertain Future. It's a great privilege to have been asked to speak at the Inspired Conference. I know we've got a very diverse audience to these sessions. I hope there'll be something in here for everyone, and I look forward to receiving questions after the session. Unfortunately, I'm not live with you today, but we'll be happy to take questions in the next few days. Those Choose Your Own Adventure books surface 3 fundamental truths. Firstly, although it may not always seem like it, it is your choice. It's not your parents' choice or your career counselor's choice or your school teacher's choice or your sister or your girlfriend or your brother's choice. It is your choice. And even if you choose to take their advice, that too is indeed your choice. Additionally, there's no rush. Like these books, you can take your time, you can contemplate the various options, you can do your research, you can speak to a variety of people for advice and form your own decision gradually, taking your time to do so. There's no purpose or value in rushing to the conclusion of the story. Indeed, if you try and find the end of a Choose Your Own Adventure story, you'll spoil the joy of the journey and all of the things that it teaches you along the way. Finally, it's never too late to turn back and explore another path. We learn something from every path we take, and there's no real genuine risk in pursuing those that turn out to be dead ends. Indeed, when we used to read those Choose Your Own Adventure books, you would see children with contorting themselves to try and get their fingers in multiple pages of the book so that they would be able to backtrack if the journey that they had taken had pursued had led them down an erroneous branch of the story. It's your choice. What do you want to be when you grow up? I hate this question. This is a question that we ask of our children, that we presume to ask other people's children, that right after we ask them how old they are and how they're doing at school, we expect them to have some sense of predestination. Typical answers from children are astronaut, policeman, perhaps some of these images on the screen, teacher, pilot, athlete, lawyer. But really, most of us work in jobs that didn't exist when we were asked this question, and most of our children will work in jobs that don't yet exist when we're asking them this question. It's not the right question. There are various improvements upon it that I would like to propose. First, what do you want to be capable of when you grow up? What are the skills you feel you should develop, the propensities that you're already demonstrating that can be transferred and applied to any number of different things that you might become? QS employer research into the skills gap, that is the difference between the things that employers are looking for and the things that they're finding in their graduates that they employ, suggests that it's not what's going on in the classroom that is lacking, it's what's going on outside it that is just as important. The 5 largest skills gaps, as determined by the thousands of employers around the world that have responded to this survey, are problem solving, resilience, communication, creativity, and data skills. For most of those, there aren't degree programs in resilience. You can't do a bachelor's of problem solving or a master's of creativity, at least not anywhere reputable that I've come across. Yet those are capabilities, skills, and character traits that can be nurtured through the universal education that an engaged student can get at university. Other alternatives to the question, who do you want to be when you grow up? What do you want to be known for or as? What are your values? How does this connect to your sense of identity? What's important to you now should be something that you consider important in your future. Where do you want to be when you grow up? Not what country or what city. I advise everybody to be as open as possible to the various opportunities that might emerge in that regard. But do you want to work outside? Do you want to work with people? Do you want to be in the service industry? Do you see yourself in an office? Are you good with technology? Do you want to be hands-on? Do you enjoy solving a good problem? These are questions that infer the kind of environment in which you're likely to be working in, rather than necessarily the specific nature of the role that you might in the future inhabit. And perhaps most importantly of all, how do you want to feel when you grow up? And specifically, how do you want to feel about your work? For most of us, our work is going to dominate a significant proportion of time in our lives. Wouldn't it be good to feel good about it, to feel purposeful about it? Research out of Yale University suggests that people have 3 ways of relating to their work: as a job, a career, or a calling. What's the difference between those things? Well, in a job, you're working for somebody else. You're working for a paycheck. You're probably not looking forward to starting it every day, and you're probably looking forward to ending it every day. You're doing your work to pay for your life outside work. You're doing your work to pay for the things that you enjoy, whether or not it's your hobbies, your friends, your family, hiking on your own in the wilderness, whatever works for you. Your job is simply a means to maximize the amount of time you have for that end. Alternatively, perhaps you relate to your work as a career, something you expect to be doing for a long time, and you're looking forward to escalating the level of responsibility and impact and influence that you're going to have. In your current work, you're looking for opportunities for advancement. You're still working for that paycheck, but a little bit more purposefully looking for opportunities to impress those around you and impress your managers in order to open future and further doors. Well, finally, perhaps you're fortunate enough to refer to your work as a calling, as I do. Something that gives you a deep sense of purpose, that you look forward to every day, that you find it bewildering when other people don't. Something that connects to your very soul and makes you feel like you're maximizing your impact and influence in the world, that you're helping others, perhaps. Well, which is it? Job, career, calling? I know which I would have liked to have chosen as a young man, and I'm fortunate enough to have ended up in that circle. But where are you? Where are you now? Where do you see yourself in the future? And what can you perhaps do about getting there? My advice? Write it down. I cannot emphasize enough the manifestation potential of answering some of these questions for yourself and compiling it to the extent that you can put it down on paper. It might even feel awkward or a little bit embarrassing at times, but its power is inexorable. In 1999, whilst I was on a work placement in the north of India through the student charity ISEC that I was involved in at university, I was exploring India, but I was also exploring myself. And I was asking myself many of these questions that I've put to you in the previous section of the presentation. What I then did was force it into a personal mission statement that I wrote down at that time, and I've still got the original piece of paper that I printed it out onto shortly after coming back from my time in India. And here is the statement as written 21 years ago. I was 23 at the time. This is a slimmer, younger version of myself with some ill-advised facial hair. I couldn't see the future. I wasn't aware of university rankings even in the UK, and we were 5 years away from the first edition of the QS World University Rankings. I hadn't heard of QS, yet today I find myself leading the division of the company that publishes the most widely used ranking of universities, a tool that literally influences the choice of millions of prospective students worldwide when they're making a decision about one of the most important investments in their young lives. I don't think that's a coincidence. It wasn't mapped out. I didn't know where I would end up, but by defining who I wanted to be and how I wanted to feel and where I wanted to be, I find myself in a position that closely maps those original values that I crunched into those words 21 years ago. And writing it down really is a vital, important final detail in making those things begin to feel real and take subconscious shape in the decisions that you subsequently make. It is an uncertain future in which we currently find ourselves. Perhaps it's always an uncertain future if we're being honest, but right now, in the grip of the global crisis, there are natural concerns. Are there still going to be jobs on the other side of university? Are there still going to be the same opportunities that I would have expected? If there's a job opportunity now, should I take it instead of going to university? QS has been surveying prospective international students since before the crisis began and throughout it, asking them specifically what impact COVID-19 has had on their plans to study overseas. And it's been profound. 61% of student respondents believe that COVID-19 has affected their plans to study abroad. But I think the more interesting statistic is that in spite of that, only 6% have determined that they no longer want to study overseas. That's quite a striking statistic. Only 6% have changed their mind altogether. There is a passionate drive to explore this chapter of their own adventure. And perhaps many of you are on one side of that equation, a university looking forward to once more accepting international students, or indeed a prospective international student studying abroad. Keep the course. The opportunities to take up those moments will once more emerge. John D. Rockefeller, as well as being an oil man, was involved in the foundation of 3 universities, the Universities of Chicago and Rockefeller University in the US, and also a university in the Philippines. Deeply embedded in education, his real life career was as an oil man. It would be interesting to see what we felt about him in today's environment. He once said, "I always tried to turn every disaster into an opportunity." For many of us, this crisis may represent disaster. Perhaps we've lost loved ones. Perhaps our companies have been constrained. Perhaps we've lost our jobs or opportunities to enter new jobs. But there are opportunities emerging from it. We've seen online providers of education see their enrollment skyrocket, with people trying to take up these opportunities to self-improve and set themselves apart from their rivals when they're pursuing future opportunities. So let's look at university from a perspective of opportunity. Has it been diminished? Has it been enhanced? Well, one of the reasons why people might go to university is to secure better jobs and more money. There are many sources of evidence on this, but mostly all agree that on average, the value of a college degree is significant over the career lifetime in terms of the probability of getting better work, more work, and more highly paid work. On all three of those, underemployment and annual data broadly suggests that whilst these things are effective for college graduates in a time of global crisis, particularly financial crisis, in general terms, college graduates are more resilient and more robust and more insulated and tend to be less affected than those who don't come out with a college degree. So if it's jobs and money that you're interested in, I strongly advise you to continue pursuing those opportunities at university. However, as Benjamin Franklin famously said, money has never made a man happy yet, nor will it. There is nothing in its nature to produce happiness. The more a man has, the more he wants. Instead of filling a vacuum, it makes one. So, if you're going to university for jobs and money, perhaps you're missing a great deal of what that spectacular and unique environment has to offer you. What else is there? Well, relationships, and for many, critical relationships, lifelong relationships. Indeed, very many people meet their future husbands and wives at university, but business relationships are also formed at university. And there are perhaps no greater examples of illustrating that than some of those who haven't even successfully qualified out of their degree, yet have clearly taken away relationships that have strongly shaped their future. Mark Zuckerberg met the co-founders of Facebook whilst a student at Harvard, and despite the fact he didn't finish, he went on to great success, partly through those associations. He was not the only one. At Microsoft, also, Bill Gates, another Harvard dropout. Whilst at Harvard, he met Steve Ballmer, who joined Microsoft in 1980 and went on to become a critical executive whilst Bill Gates was CEO, and to take over as CEO for 14 years after Bill Gates had decided to move on to different things. Again, a critical business relationship without whom Bill Gates may not have experienced the same success that he went on to enjoy. Over at Google, Larry Page and Sergey Brin, the co-founders of Google, met whilst at Stanford University. And here we've got some tech entrepreneurs that actually finished their degrees, but nonetheless went away with a relationship that probably far outweighed the influence of the qualification, which is what they went to the university to acquire in the first place. These stories are not limited to tech startups. There are other greats in all sorts of fields who met formative, critical, crucial relationships during university. This, for those of you that don't know or don't watch old British comedy, is Monty Python. Graham Chapman, Eric Idle, Terry Jones, Michael Palin, John Cleese met in two clusters whilst at Oxford and Cambridge, later coming together to form Monty Python and have a great and successful life in comedy and the arts. Interestingly, in this case, their collaboration didn't come from one particular field. They didn't meet on the same course as each other. They came from different disciplines, two studying English, one medicine, one history, one law. University is a huge melting pot of people with different ideas and different experiences, and those relationships may not be within a specific discipline. So critical. So relationships are a critical takeaway that many people experience through their time at university, whether those relationships pan out to be personal or professional or a little bit of both. But university provides a safe haven to experience all sorts of aspects of life. At most universities, there are over 100 clubs and societies. You can experiment with your look, as I did. Whilst at university, I enjoyed blue hair for a few months. I had a penchant for yellow trousers for a perhaps inadvisable period. I experienced failure and recovery from failure. I learned how to network in that first week of university. Extracurricular activities were an important part. I learned how to live on a budget, a degree of independence, but not total isolation from my parents. I played new sports that I'd not played before, took up Japanese for about 5 minutes, experienced leadership moments in a safe environment, and once again, I'll come back, I met my wife whilst involved in a university charity that I went on to work for after I graduated. All of that rich experience counterbalances a perception that graduates are coming out as sort of vanilla citizens, all trained to look and think and feel the same way. University is a rich and diverse experience, and based on the choices that you make, it will provide you with mechanisms to distinguish yourself from your peers and rivals when you come out in the workplace thereafter. University is not some sort of homogenizing experience that churns out lots of people that all look, feel and think the same way. It is exactly the opposite, but only if you engage in the full experience and remember that university is about your universal education and not just what you learn in the classroom. The next truth is that there's no rush. You don't need to be able to answer that, what do you want to be when you grow up, even when you're grown up. Take your time, choose wisely, onboard advice by all means, into the workplace, look for data. The QS mission is to enable motivated people anywhere in the world to fulfill their potential by fostering educational achievement, international mobility and career development. If you think I'm just talking to prospective students, 19 and 20-year-olds right now, you'd be mistaken. These are messages and values and choices that people in all walks of life and at all levels can take forward and re-evaluate what they're doing and whether or not it serves the purpose that they aspired to for themselves. QS provides a range of rich tools that are designed to help empower these key decision points. Take your time. Do your research, explore what information is out there in data form, use our connection opportunities via some of our events to meet other people and discuss with other people who have been to the institution or have worked in the career that you aspire to understand what's really important. However, when you're doing that research, the most important thing is that you put first things first. For untold generations, we have been led to believe that happiness orbited around success, that if we work hard enough, we will be successful, and only if we're successful will we become happy. The opposite is true. This is a really important point to absorb. For many years, as Sean Aker explains in his book, for generations we have been told to imagine that on the other side of hard work and achievement lies happiness. But truthfully, it is happiness that will deliver both hard work through finding our purpose, our center, and motivating us to work hard, and ultimately success. Because quite typically the things that we enjoy tend to be the things that we have the most potential to impress others with. If you are under pressure from parents or career counselors or teachers to, become a doctor, become a lawyer, take up a language, do things that don't feel like the things you want to do. Give that advice pause. Think deeply about what lies in your heart and how you can pursue those choices through university, as they will invariably lead you down an ultimately more successful, if not necessarily always easier, path. And I think for most of us, we would rather find ourselves going to work to pursue our purpose, rather than leaving work to pursue our purpose in what was left of our remaining time. So briefly, towards the conclusion of my presentation, I'd like to talk about what leading universities have been doing and what they need to do to embrace the priorities of the next generation. Since we started our rankings in the early 2000s, leading universities have been driving their performance through three key accelerators. 1, enhanced internationalization. 2, amplified collaboration. And 3, a huge doubling down in research productivity and publication. These three drivers have driven the universities that are currently found in the top of global rankings into their current position, and have also had various spin-off benefits. Much of that research helps economies, helps societies, helps communities. That international component enables young people to explore different cultures and learn different frames of reference. And that collaboration aspect brings the world's greatest minds together to rally against some of humanity's most challenging problems. I'd like to discuss, though, what's coming up in the next 20 years and how the leading universities in 20 years' time will have had to pivot in order to maintain or secure that position at the top of international rankings and at the top of any other list of prestigious institutions. First, we are going to see the death of the lecture. That's not to say that certain lectures cannot be inspirational, but for the most part, this is a university lecture. Academics are not always the most charismatic and entertaining the first time they present a topic, but when they've been doing it for 15 years to a bunch of wide-eyed undergraduates and they'd rather be doing their research, that quality is inevitably going to atrophy. Why would we not use technology to port in a world-class lecture from the other side of the world, perhaps to pause it to introduce interaction, and why would we spend so much time of our prize brains that could be applied to some of the biggest research challenges or to supervising in small groups, PhDs, why would we spend their time doing something that they hate and their audience hates and that nobody gets very much out of? Technology will resolve this problem, and if universities don't pivot, they'll be left with a lot of empty lecture theatres they won't know what to do with. So there's an infrastructure dimension to this as well. Students are going to be seeking what I like to refer to as next level flexibility. This is not just the ability to take their courses when they're on the bus on the way to campus, or whilst they're on the beach on holiday, or in between races down the ski slopes once we're again allowed to travel. It also means that that diversity of experience is not just going to become allowed, it's going to become encouraged. Universities are going to be encouraging their students to take components of their courses from other universities, to engage in micro-credentials and give them potential credit for it. And perhaps controversially, when they go on to consider postgraduate options, actively trying to convince them to go somewhere else instead of trying to enroll them in their own courses. This will create more rounded, more competitive and stronger graduates that have got a broader breadth of experience and are more likely to tick those challenging boxes that employers are seeking. Finally, I'd like to talk about Generation Greta. the next generation of students coming into universities, indeed this generation of students coming into universities, have had enough of excuses. They're looking for our generation as leaders to transform organizations and habits and cultures to better take care of this planet on which we all live. They're demanding it. In London, they're gluing themselves to railings to insist upon it. They are taking strikes from school to enhance and land their point. And they will be equally as demanding of the universities that they move on towards. For the most part, the science to which the environmental movement refers originates inside universities. It's universities that are part of that movement to understand the damage that we're doing to our planet and our environment. Yet, in general, universities are not moving to a carbon neutral reality as quickly as we need them to in order to not only clean up their own operations, but set a glittering example to other organizations that they should be doing the same. In my opinion, we need to accelerate, and the institutions that are at the top of our tables in 20 years' time will be those that have heeded these simple messages. Most of all, however, to both institutions and prospective students considering institutions, courses and careers, the most important thing is to stay true to yourself, to recognize and describe your distinctive identity, and to follow your heart down the right choices that are going to best serve your ultimate needs. And if you do, and it doesn't work out, or something that you believed was the right choice for you turns out later to not be, do remember the truth, that it's never too late to explore another path. And if we remember that, we won't be too afraid of taking the risk in the first place, of pursuing something that perhaps others around us are advising us not to consider. If we can make a success of what we love, we can love our success when we eventually find it. Throughout all of these decisions, whether or not you make the right one first of all, or it takes you a few attempts to reach the right decision, QS will be consistently exhibiting insight, establishing standards, evaluating performance, enabling benchmarking, educating strategy, empowering connections, and elevating the brand of institutions and individuals to best choose their own adventure.